We get started, Jenny? You ready? And of course, because here we are doing a thing hybrid virtual, my camera has decided not to function, but nobody has to see me online. You all can see me in person, but for those who are joining us virtually, I'm Bill Maurer, the director of the Institute for Money, Technology, and Financial Inclusion. And thank you all for being here in person and also for being here online for our talk today by Mariana Lutzi and Ariel Wilkes from the University of San Martin, The Dollar, How the US Dollar Became a Popular Currency in Argentina. There's a book, and here it is. And once they get talking, I'll just pass this around so folks can flip through. I do want to begin just by acknowledging that this event and the UC Irvine campus are within the ancestral territories of the Achaman and Tongva peoples, the ceded unshared territories that stretch from the Santa Ana River to Aliso Creek and beyond. And as members of a land grant institution, we acknowledge the Achaman and Tongva as the traditional land caretakers whose efforts to steward and protect the land continue today. And again, it's my pleasure to welcome my colleagues, Mariana and Ariel. Mariana is a researcher at the National Council of Scientific and Technological Research and Associate Professor of Sociology at the Interdisciplinary School of Advanced Studies at the University of San Martin. She is the author of Réinventer le marché, les clubs de trop face à la crise en Argentine. And then the co-author, and now it's going to switch to Spanish, the co-author of Rompecabezas, Transformaciones de la Estructura Social Argentina. And also The Dollar, How the US Dollar Became a Popular Currency in Argentina. She's published several other articles on the sociology of money, including contributions on economic crisis and alternative currencies in Argentina. And Ariel Wilkes received his PhD from the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales. He is a professor at the Universidad de San Martin, dean in its School of Interdisciplinary Advanced Social Studies, and a researcher at CONICET. He's the author of Historia de cómo endeudamos I can't say this word. That's it, that word. Del dinero. And now we're going to go into English, hooray, The Moral Power of Money, and co-author of The Dollar, the book and the work that we're going to hear about today. So without further ado, I will hand it off to my colleagues, and thank you so much for being here. We're really thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for coming in person and virtually through the screen. We are very happy to stay here, our first time in South California. It's an honor to be here in this university. We want to thank Bill Maurer for the invitation. Also, we want to thank Jen to help us with all logistical stuff. We are very glad to stay here sharing our work with many friends that are here in this room and also in the screen. And we want to thank to the sponsors, the Institute for Money and Technology and Financial Inclusion and the School of Social Science. So,
Sorry.
yes.
There.
This photo was taken during 2023 election campaign, which brought Javier Milei to the presidency of Argentina in December 2023. In the picture, we can see the president to be waving a giant $100 bill in front of the audience. However, this bill, designed by one of his followers, does not show Benjamin Franklin's portrait, but Milei's. In his election platform, the alt-right candidate, a devotee of Donald Trump, proposed to dollarize the Argentine economy. In his view, dollarization would end the excessive growth in money supply, which he considered at the same time the sole cause of galloping inflation and the depression of the power of politicians, who he considered a parasitic caste. As we can see, the US dollar played a leading role in the 2023 presidential election. Nevertheless, this leading role is part of a much longer historical series, which did not begin at that moment. Let us share a video that will help understand the nature of this historical series, which today reached a new episode at the moment Javier Milei took office. We just watched was aired on April 22nd, 2019. That day, the dollar was worth 44 pesos in the local foreign exchange market. 4 years had passed since the date in the question, and all the answer options seem equally remote. However, the question itself was no surprise to the local TV audience. In other countries, only economic professionals or people with links to the foreign trade keep up with exchange rate. In Argentina, on the contrary, the peso-dollar exchange rate is a component of ordinary life, especially in times of economic difficulties. You may be surprised by this fact, but according to a report published by the Federal Reserve in 2006, Argentina topped the list of the country, other than the US, with the most dollars per capita. The research that led to the book we are presenting today is based on one of the sociology of money premises. Quantitative evidence of the growth of banknotes in circulation is not enough to understand the deep meanings and uses that money has in social life. For this reason, the question Mariana and I raised were inspired more by scenes like those in the show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire than the Federal Reserve's report. Given the fact that knowing the value of the dollar could even be the key to securing success in the TV show, we wonder, how did Argentine men and women become familiar with the US currency? How did they learn to deal with an often fluctuating exchange rate? How did they find out where to buy and sell dollars and how to do it? In other words, how did the dollar become so popular among Argentines, and what were its social, political, and economic consequences over the decades? To answer this question, we drew on the sociology of money to propose a sociology of dollars popularization in the Argentine society. Our focus is in two different dynamics. On the one hand, the dollar as an artifact of popular culture; on the other, its incorporation in the financial repertoire of a growing number of social groups. Each of one of these dynamics constitutes a specific dimension of the US dollar's social life in Argentina. On the one hand, the one is most evident to us all, namely the transactional or private life. The dollar uses as a saving and investment instrument, as a means of payment in specific markets like real estate, or as a unit of account in different transactions and calculations. On the other is the public life, the US currency in Argentina. By this, we mean its presence in public sphere under multiple formats and meanings, for example, in political discourses, in the press, in advertising, in the movies, and nowadays in social media such as X or TikTok. These two paths through which the dollar's history in Argentina unfolded are autonomous, but they have also fed each other. During the second half of the 20th century, starting from the Bretton Woods Agreement, the US dollar played a starring role in the international monetary system. This role was even reinforced after 1971, when President Nixon decided to sever the US dollar's convertibility into gold. Starting in the 70s, it has become not only the global foreign trade currency, but a common exchange medium and, most of all, store of value in different regional landscape, giving shape to a new era of multiple currencies. In fact, the recent history of money in widely different nations can be understood as an expansion of monetary plurality that create a lasting bond between strong currency, in many cases the US dollar, and a weak local currency. Interesting cases include Israel, Russia, Nigeria, Vietnam, Panama, Ecuador, Cuba, El Salvador. Among these Latin American countries, Argentina stands out. The dollar has not replaced the local currency as it happened in Panama and more recently in Ecuador, but it's a country where US legal tender has been in use for decades, especially but not exclusively during the times of profound crisis. Economists and economic journalists have in general referred to a macroeconomic condition to explain the Argentine demand for dollars. Recurring trade deficit and or inflation have been the reason for locals seeking dollars, where they use it as a saving method or as a leading currency in dollarized domestic markets. While Viviana Sellitzer's works break away from the sociological traditional narrative about money, we drew inspiration from it to challenge the dominant narrative about the dollar's role in Argentina and raise questions that had not been asked. Instead of macroeconomic factors expected to explain why the dollar is so relevant, we focus on how and when the dollar became a popular currency in Argentina and its after effects. The US dollar in Argentina was slowly but progressively popularized from the 30s until today. Over this long period, information about the dollar, initially only of interest to financial agents or foreign trade experts, became relevant for a broader social groups. At the same time, the dollar was gradually incorporated into the financial repertoires of business and families alike. But how can social actors without contact with the financial exchange market incorporate the greenback into their savings, investment, loans, and consumer practices? In her seminal work, Viviana Selitzer reconstructed from the bottom up the process in which macroeconomic dynamic and policies are connected to the widespread use of a given currency. This model of analysis is based on the idea that the currency expansion is about more than just a government decision or certain macroeconomic condition. Instead, the popularization of a currency results from a process we might refer to as a currency familiarization that sociologists must reconstruct. In Argentina, the US dollar was built as a popular culture artifact that made it a familiar currency, one capable of providing cognitive, emotional, and practical guidance for anyone venturing into unfamiliar economic universe. Therefore, starting in the 30s, but especially from the 50s on, a new relationship between popular culture, financial practices, and the exchange market resulted in the dollar's increasingly central role in the Argentine economy and politics. By examining national dailies, weekly news magazines, and economic journals, we have reconstructed the dollar's gradual evolution into a new worthy currency from the 30s until 2015. Even though the coverage of the bag vary among new outlets, it clearly stands out from all other foreign currencies, progressively moving from the inside pages to headlines and then the covers. Journalists reported at the foreign exchange market made the Forex universe understandable to broader audience. The corpus we build then show various ways of teaching different audience how to participate in the exchange market. These materials provide people with tips, guides, and training on how to navigate the shifting borders of foreign markets. Regarding cultural production, print media was our main source, particularly advertisement and comic strip. However, film and theater also proved useful, as did more recently social media posts and memes circulating on WhatsApp. All were sources of information and fundamental channels for expanding the border of legitimate access, participation, and interpretation of the Forex market. Over time, these materials made generations of Argentines familiar with the different uses and meanings of the dollar. This is why they help us reconstruct the historical series of the US currency's popularization in Argentina.
So now let me walk you through the different steps in this process. The transformation of the US dollar into a special money in Argentina was a slow and gradual process. The social expansion, economic proliferation, and political and cultural intensification of the dollar advanced at different paces, shaping what we have called different stages of the dollar's popularization. Okay. So over time, more social groups took part in the exchange market, from the economic and state elites in the 30s and 40s to workers, pensioners, and women in the 80s. The use of the US dollar as a unit of reference or payment method gradually spread to more markets and transactions, from the tourism market in the 50s to the real estate market, art world, and car industry in the 80s. The intensification of its use varied as well. Originally, the US dollar was the exclusive focus of foreign trade actors. And since the return of democratic rule in 1983, it has become a central political indicator in all political electoral campaigns, So each stage in the dollar popularization represents an innovation in the uses and meanings inherited from the past. From the moment when the international crisis hit and throughout the Second World War, public discussions about the dollar arose. But in those debates, the dollar didn't stand out from other strong currencies like the sterling pound or the franc. It wouldn't pique the interest of anyone outside the elites either. That's why we consider this period the prehistory of the US dollar popularization in Argentina. Things were different from 1969 and throughout the 60s. In those years, marked by high economic instability, the dollar made it into the headlines, becoming a great matter of public concern. The press would not only report its ups and downs, but also start to use the dollar as a benchmark for allowing both experts and general readers to understand the economic state of affairs. Here, for instance, we can see some advertisements where the US dollar is used as a benchmark as part of a sales pitch from local businesses in 67 or to inform mid-price rises in 58. Yet, this would not mean that the American currency had become part of people's financial repertoires. We will need to wait until the 70s for this to happen. This was the first time the dollar's public and private lives in Argentina seemed to go hand in hand. From 1971 to 1981, when a massive devaluation ended the first period of neoliberal reforms in the country, the dollar was not only an issue of great public concern, but also an increasingly popular savings method. In the picture at the top, we can clearly see the change in demographics of Buenos Aires foreign exchange agencies. Here in 1981, women in the front row, something impossible to find in photographs from the 60s. And at the bottom, different magazines covers shows how some markets, like art market on the left and soccer players market, were dollarized in the period. During the 80s, the period that closed with two hyperinflation crises in 1989 and 1990, the dollar ran amok in Argentina. Important domestic markets, such as real estate, became totally dollarized, and they are until today. In times of crisis, the American currency was used not just as store value, but also as means of exchange and unit of account. In 1989, during hyperinflation, many retailers advertised the prices of their goods in dollars, while contracts for jobs or rent and also household fees like plumbing or repair services were established in the American currency in order to avoid daily price updates. This centrality also reflected in public debates. From editorials to cartoons and advertisement, the dollar was a star in the media. Finally, that same year, 89, when the second Democratic administration was to be elected, the value of the dollar had also become a relevant feature in the political arena. The 1990s will bring another innovation, this time related to the transactional life of the US dollar. Once the currency board regime was enacted in 91, the dollar became legal tender in the country. Although this was not a proper dollarization, the peso was not fully replaced by the dollar. This meant that people could pay for purchases, sign contracts, open bank accounts, or take out mortgages in dollars. As a result of these measures, bank deposits in dollars represented 50% of the total at the end of this period, while bank loans in dollars were even higher. At the same time, the currency board regime supposed a dollar peg. The exchange rate was fixated by law. 1 peso was worth $1. And as a result of this, public discussions around the dollar's value would fade out, at least for a decade. In 2001, a major crisis ended this regime, implying, among other desperate measures, the freezing of dollar bank accounts. In this critical context, the uses and meanings of the dollars shifted again. Dollars, as part of families' financial repertoires, were placed at the core of social protest. For the first time in history, the dollar was associated with a conflict that played out both on the streets and in the courts. And here you can see former Minister of the Economy, Domingo Cavallo, the dollar pegs mastermind, and protesters in 2002 holding a sign where it says, "We have put dollars in bank accounts, dollars we want." Finally, the last stage we have identified goes from 2003 in the aftermath of the crisis until 2015. In this case, both dimensions of the dollar's social life in Argentina are intertwined. The American currency is still part of Argentines' financial repertoires and continues to be present in the public agenda. But starting in 2011, this interaction intensified. New forex market regulations gave rise to street demonstrations and public debates around the dollar's real value. This time, public discussions also showed new features. The government engaged in a failed attempt to promote the de-dollarization of Argentinians' financial practices through both the official rhetoric and new financial tools. Although our book story ends in 2015, we would like to point out some trends that have marked the following years up to the present. Since 2015, growing inflation has intensified the centrality of the dollar's double life. On the one hand, as inflation increased, new transactions became dollarized, such as rent prices, and demand for dollars purchases grew. The return of high inflation contributed to reactivating the uses and meanings of the dollar that had been established in the past. On the other hand, the foreign exchange market played a leading role in the 2019 and 2023 presidential campaigns. With inflation on the rise, the party in office electoral chances were increasingly mediated by their ability to keep the dollar's value under control. At the same time, citizen expectations were primarily shaped by the signals from the forex market, which became a key referee in the electoral contest. These signals referred to the credibility of the government in office and, above all, to its ability to curb the value of the dollar, which impacts on the economy's prices and therefore on inflation levels. So with the history of the dollar's popularization in mind, we can now go back to the image of Javier Milei's electoral campaign we saw at the beginning of the presentation. Part of a new global wave of far-right political movements and government, the Argentine version brings the novelty of promoting a foreign currency, a proposal that is out of tune, we could say, with the ethno-nationalist orientation of figures such as Donald Trump, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, or Viktor Orbán in Hungary, among others. The US dollar's long history in Argentine society shaped Milei's political performance and paved the way for his electoral victory. As we demonstrate throughout the book, the US currency has become part of the local ways of doing, thinking, and dealing with the economy. As Milei's experience shows, the dollar centrality in the country is not only economic, but also political. In other words, it has become an essential piece of the Argentinian political life. On the one hand, political actors measure their chance of success or failure through the elusive value of the US currency. On the other, citizens consider the dollar a central device for evaluating the political scenario and its possible outcomes. Argentine political scientist Guillermo O'Donnell called for considering other institutions beyond the formal ones to understand how democracy works. In this vein, we propose to see Argentina's foreign exchange market as an informal institution shaping local democratic behavior. Throughout the 4 decades of democratic rule, a monetary culture built around the US dollar has helped the forex market to become such an institution. Javier Milei's arrival in office suggests that this thesis can be taken even further. Only time will tell whether Milei's dollarization project was just compelling political performance or marked a new turning point in the slow and progressive transformation of the greenback into a local currency. The Social Meaning of Money, Selizer's masterpiece book, narrates the monetary unification of the United States around the greenback at the beginning of the 20th century. Our book studies the next phase in the dollar's history, its consolidation as a global currency. Many books reveal how the dollar was central to the world monetary system during the 20th century. For some time, the global expansion of the US currency and its influence on the economic dynamics of different regions was understood as the natural offshoot of America's predominance in the world economy. However, as our book reveals, this process is more complex and, more importantly, exceeds geopolitics. The dollar is indeed a global currency embedded in many national economies. Multiple articulations of local history, economy, and culture were needed for this to happen. Its conversion into a popular currency that circulates in multiple territories and predominates ordinary finance, not merely as a currency among elites, needs to be explored. Our book then sheds light on the unexplored aspects of global currency. That is what happens when they become popular currencies outside the US border. In this sense, it contributes also to an open and central debate. The stability or the decline of the dollar as a dominant global currency is a recurring question among scholars of the international monetary order. The currency war between the dollar and the yuan is a regular headline on news portals around the world. With our book, we are far from predicting the future of the US dollar, of course, but we are offering a toolbox to help understand how a global currency, today it is the dollar, but maybe tomorrow is another one, condition and transform the public and daily lives of millions of people around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you both so much. The floor is open for questions, and for the folks who are online, I'll do my best to moderate. If you want to just maybe just put a note in the chat or something, then I can know that you have a question. But anyone in the room? Go ahead, David.
So I have a lot of questions, but
Stop sharing.
thank you. I have two questions. I'm sorry, they're not completely internal to the argument and what you presented, but one, I'm thinking of other contexts where the price of a primary export goes up and down. You know, in El Salvador, the price of coffee, that was something that many people watched during the era of coffee because, and it would be a political thing, or for a shorter period, the price of cotton. So I just wonder, how does this fit with the longer history of this watching for these external measures? And then the other, this is not just another observation, now in Bitcoin contexts, there's a concerted effort to educate people around this odd practice. And it's almost institutionalized now. And I wonder, was there anything like that with the dollar, kind of formal dollar education projects?
You very much. Okay. So maybe I'll start for the second one. I wouldn't say it was an institutionalized practice like dollar education project itself, but we could say that there were many different actors performing some kind of economic or monetary pedagogies that helped the dollar became what it is today. So in the book, we consider, for instance, the work of economic journalists and the shifts in their own way to perform their jobs in media, mostly in the region press, in the journals, between the 60s and the 70s. And it's interesting because they becoming a more key actor inside the media, first in the press and then in television, in the news, in television, was hand in hand with the rise on the interest of the dollar. So they helped it. The dollar became more understandable by people, and also the US dollar was a very important tool for them becoming very key figures in the media. So there's an interesting relationship there. And you could think of different actors performing that kind of pedagogy today, for instance, influencers in social media. And then regarding, it is interesting because we didn't pictured at any point in this long history. The price of wheat or the price of meat, of international prices of cereals or meat that Argentina exports were like very important public numbers in Argentina. Other external indicators were, for instance, during the 90s, the dollar peg evoked that the foreign exchange rate at an important figure because it was cited by law. And in that case, so the indicator people followed just to know how bad things were, the risk international risk indicators like the country risk index. So there were external figures playing that role, but not the local export. It's interesting. So that those measures, of course, those measures existed, but they never became popular indicators.
Of course, soybean producer, they pay attention of the value of the soybean in the international market. Not is a price realize.
Just a generic question about how dollarization affected the wealth of elites and various established elites in Argentina, and what the political process was. I'm sure you're so the effect on, yeah.
Thanks. This question is a big question. I thought it was clear that we are not talking about the proper dollarization. Argentine economy were dollarized. We're talking about the popularization of the dollar, becomes currency, ordinary currency, but not the legal currency. First point important for our argument. To question, start for the second part. In our story, we want to show how the exchange market become an informal political institution, formal democratic institution. At least in last 40 years, start again the democratic rule, the government. The exchange market become a referee conflicts in hand elite, the political elites has to control what happened special market, and the other, the citizen, take decision around what happened this market. For us, there are a connection in the process. The connection is the popularization of the dollar. The dollar is so popular, and this is the key explanation by the dollar play a central role in the political process. Popularization, well, the politicization, the dollar. First question, it's important that we have to, that most of the elites has her wealthy outside Argentina, in the shadow banking. So this is a big component of this story. Yeah.
Do you have somebody wait?
I have several, but why don't you go first, and then we'll get to the ones that are online.
Thank you so much. It's such a fascinating project, and I have to disclose that there's more than just an intellectual component to this. I've known your research for a long time, And also, we all admire Viviana Zelazer's work on the sociology of money. So I'm not going to ask about that. I actually would like to reminisce for 30 seconds about how growing up in the former Yugoslavia, we had the German mark. And that was our dollar in some ways, in which you saved in the German mark, you bought stuff. And then I think later on, when the countries of the former Yugoslavia transitioned, some of them adopted the euro and some not yet. So for instance, in Croatia, we would vacation and we would use the euro, even though it was not the former currency. So one part of the question is, how can we learn from these other cases, and whether you've looked into some of them to understand what happened in Argentina? And I know it's a big question. So just in case you have, otherwise skip it and go to my second part, which is, how does the currency actually travel? Is it linked to migration and tourism, and how do people bring it into the country? Because, unlike everything moving into electronic markets, I would imagine that dollarization and how it becomes popular is linked to having the actual cash bill in hand. And so if you could reflect just a little bit on that, and how this may have influenced that it was the dollar rather than the German mark or the sterling or the pound, because that was my third question, but it's too big. So just pick and choose whatever you'd like to address. Thank you so much.
Elena, I can start for the last one. How does the currency actual travels? I think it's a very interesting question generally, about also the materiality of these currencies, and of course the fact that it is the dollar and not other currencies. Well, in this time we considered the prehistory of this dollar popularization. There was, if you want, certain competition between the dollar and the sterling pound. At the time, the UK, Britain was the main commercial partner of Argentina, so the main buyer of Argentina's exports. So of course, what happened to the sterling pound was the main important thing. That was the international currency that people would follow in order to understand economic affairs. But at that time, it was not something, foreign currency, that was into ordinary people financial repertoires, but it would pay attention to the sterling pound and not to the US dollar. The shift to the US dollar has to do with the rise of the US dollar controlling the Americas area economically, starting in the interwar period, but mostly after the Second World War. So the importance of the US dollar compared to other currencies has to do with politics, to formations of capitalism. But then, of course, there's this cash economy part of the story. So the main way dollars come to Argentina is through export. So the export sector is very, very important in all this story. And then financial sector, we have listened to really crazy stories like managers taking a plane to Miami or to New York in the morning and coming back in the afternoon with suitcases stashed with US dollar bills just to feed the foreign exchange market in the 80s. So as late as in the 80s. So it was really a cash issue. And then we have looked a little bit on what happened in other countries. It was not so easy to find literature on that. But one of the things wouldn't say that it was like that everywhere, but one of the things that continues to be striking in the Argentinian case is that it survived crisis. So in many places during times of acute crisis, you see people go into a foreign currency in order to replace some factors of the local one. What happens in Argentina is that the dollar was able to survive the periods of crisis.
We have Magdalena Villarreal has joined us here from CSS. Magda, hello.
Hello, thank you very much. First, I want to congratulate Mariana and Ariel for this wonderful book. I read it first in Spanish and I thought it was great. But then, before this presentation, I read it in English and I said, oh my God, this sounds different to a different audience. It's excellent. It's what I didn't read it in English, but I read it in Spanish and thought of the audience that would be listening to this. And I think it's absolutely great. So again, I want to congratulate you. I think that, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is how similar it is to the way the dollar is behaving in Mexico. How it also has been used politically as well as a commodity. But what I think is one of the great contributions of the book is how it is used as a cultural artifact and also political artifact, of course. And I can see that in Mexico as well. When you say it has advanced in different stages, I wouldn't use the word advanced, but yes, it has gone through different stages. The critical point, as you point out, is the popularization. How people use it in everyday life as their almost the same as their local currency. In Mexico, this happens to a degree in the northern border, for example, where people commute between Mexico and the United States continually. But what is happening in Mexico, and I wonder to what degree it's also happening in Argentina, is that investors, of course, are going for what gives them more money. So they are also investing in other currencies very, very often. Also, we have a lot of people from Korea and from Asia in general. So the transactions in other currencies are not very common, but they can be made. So I wonder how you think the dollar will fare in this combination of currencies, where you have different currencies coming in and being used. Perhaps not as popularized as they were in Argentina, but maybe, yes, to a degree, very common. Thank you.
Thank you, Magdalena, very much for your question and your comment. I am not sure that this is what you were thinking about, but I would say that we have two sides of this like combination of currencies story. One of the things that we are seeing today, and we will need to wait a little bit to know what happens, is that this popularization of the US dollar has been up to now mostly a cash history, cash economy history. And nowadays, through different other means and platforms and the platformization of the importance of the digital economy, one could have asked, well, what will happen? Will the digital economy kill the dollar or include it? And what we are seeing is that it's mostly a history of including. People are on the one hand, the financial market has been able to find ways, very easy ways that became very popular since the pandemic, to buy dollars through financial instruments going through digital apps. So in that case, you can finally have your physical dollar bills, but you can buy dollars, you can do savings in dollars without the banks, almost without the banks, and not being in cash. So that's one side of the picture. The other one is that the government is fostering what they name as currency basket. I think that the fostering the combination of different currencies in regular transactions. Of course, in Argentina, foreign currency is the dollar. People will have some transactions in euros because of the connections between the Argentinian economy and Europe, or the Argentinian population and euros, but that would be still something not very important. But on the other side, you have cryptocurrencies, and cryptocurrencies have been at the same time competition and complementary to the US dollar in very interesting ways. So I would say that we need to wait, but there's something going on definitely in that case. And you know, investment, like big investment in foreign currency in Argentina has always been there from the starting point. That's not new. That has been a very big business since.
Well, maybe have in mind that in our story, the exchange market, in some sense, replaced the stock market. So, for Argentine financial culture, invest in currency is a best way to financialization the financial, the economic repertoire. So it's important to know that the penetration of the market is less than the penetration and popularization of the exchange market. And I would have to highlight the point that Mariana is the cash economy. Still, the Argentine is, and the dollarized economy in Argentina is a cash economy. Also because it's informal and black economy. There is a shadow bank system, informal bank system that is organized through the cash economy.
I believe that Taylor Nelms should be able to jump on the screen. Taylor posted a ton of questions, and so I was like, forget about it. I'm just gonna let him talk. So Taylor, hello.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Mariana. Hi, Ariel. It's been way too long. Good to see you. And thank you very, very much for including me here. And I'm really excited about this work, and obviously have loved the book. I don't remember the questions I asked because I put them in the chat and then you promoted me to panelist, and of course all the questions I wrote went away. That's okay. There's like 3 general questions and they're all entirely selfish, so you'll just have to forgive me for asking them. So the first is because I have spent so much time doing work in Ecuador, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on comparing those the dollarization, the kind of de facto dollarization in places like Argentina, in Argentina kind of par excellence, right? Kind of de facto, a case of de facto dollarization, and then the de jure dollarization of Ecuador, right? The very official adoption of the US dollar in a moment of crisis. And these two movements of dollarization, these two kinds of dollarization are of course connected, as you I'm sure really well know, because in that moment in which Ecuador dollarized in the late 1990s, 1999, early 2000, the groundwork for that was really laid by a kind of transnational network and movement of right libertarian scholar activists from places like the Mises Institute in the United States, but also folks like Domingo Cavallo and Carlos Menem, and who have historically argued for formal dollarization in Argentina. And so I wonder if maybe you could sort of draw out some of those connections if you've thought about them at all. The second question is around the kind of racial and ethnic politics of dollarization in Argentina. And I wonder if you could reflect a little bit further on what those kind of racial politics of the dollar are in Argentina, and maybe how it's shaped potentially its role in kind of far right politics there and internationally. And then I have other follow-up questions based on things that Nina has said and Magda have said about the kind of material tools and technologies of using the dollar in cash economies or now kind of increasingly in digital spaces, but we can save that for later. So I would love to hear your thoughts on Ecuador very selfishly and on the kind of racial politics of dollarization. Thank you.
Thanks, Taylor.
So first, hi Taylor, nice to see you. Always Taylor's work about dollarization in Ecuador was a fantastic source for us in our work. So we have the chance to personally thank you for your fantastic work about Ecuador. Well, the first question, I think first is to say again that Argentina never properly dollarized the economy. It's different things. And for us, what's important to remark that, and also in part of the story we reconstruct, we show when the discussion about the dollarization of the economy entered in our story, when the politicians and the economists start discussing around the dollarization. Maybe this is a first point to compare with Ecuador. I think maybe the discussion around the dollarization started in the 70s in our case, and Ecuador started at the end of the 80s, and of course, in the case of Argentina, never dollarized, proper dollarized. And the second, our story is about the popularization of the dollar. Also, the long story of popularization. This long story starts in the 30s. We can show in our argument, in our story, how the dollar in the 30s, but also in the 50s, the dollar became a relevant currency in the public discussion, in the public sphere, and then in the ordinary financial repertoire. In that sense, I think we have to compare two different things, not the dollarization. We have to compare the popularization of the dollar in both experience. I did a volume about that. Your colleague Nick Martinez from Franzo Buena, he wrote a chapter about that. Also, David chapter about El Salvador, and Magdalena also wrote a chapter about Mexico. The frame is to compare not the dollarization, it's to compare the popularization of the dollar. When was started in each cases that the dollar become a popular currency that's an ordinary currency in public life and the private life. This is maybe one thing about that. The second question, and then the ethnic racial dimension of the story is not relevant, I think so. Not relevant. Maybe I don't know what you're thinking about that, but there's nothing particularly interesting about that in our story or in the process that the dollar became a popular currency in Argentine experience. I don't find anything about it.
I would add to that. I think that I'm not sure, but maybe Taylor, you were thinking, if you linked it to far-right politics today. And I think that when we think about these far-right movements and governments, we have this nationalist take that it's very important both in the economy regarding protection and on, and also regarding this, like, important threats to freedom in the case of the US and also in the case of Italy, for instance, immigrants and immigration as a big issue. And in the case of Argentina, that nationalist aspect is completely absent. That's the real difference between these, our example, our variation, and the others. It is not important economically because, on the contrary, we are studying, for instance, the substitution of the national currency with a foreign one, but also it is not important in terms of political adversaries. The main threat for Milei government is wokeism. There's no external threat. It's just internal, and it is progresistas in Spanish. It's not. It's our word for woke. So it's mostly well, it's other kind of debate, and that's one of the reasons there's not this ethnic or racial aspect to this political debate. Then there's another completely different thing, is to what extent this is important or not, or has been important or not in Argentinian politics, and to what extent that reveals to what point there were some kind of denial of the racial issue in Argentina. But that has not to do only with the US dollar, but in general, it's another thing. And then I would like to pick quickly your third question on the questions that you had written about the uses of money and conflicts or tensions in material terms, because I think that there may be some interesting examples with recent ones. One of them was, well, these people, general normal workers, pensioners, middle classes, lower middle classes, even working class people are used to saving dollars each time they have money to save. So during the pandemic, and when the forex market is strictly controlled, it's difficult to access that market, and so in that case, everyone goes to a very legitimate but illegal black market, which in the last 15 years has been called the blue dollar market. But of course, that's purely cash. So during the pandemic, we had the problem of how to access that blue market because everyone was at their houses, and at the same time there were strict. The controls on the foreign exchange market were more strict than before. So there was this very interesting debate on whether people having received federal aid to households during the pandemic could access or not the official forex market. Because for the government we've handled them money to cope with the pandemic. That's not money to go to make extra pressure on the forex market. So you cannot access the official market. So you need to go around through the informal, legitimate, but illegal one. And then the financial system came up with this three-step way to access US dollars through the treasury bonds. So people would buy treasury bonds that were issued in dollars, then sell them after, and then cash the US dollars. But it was quite sophisticated until some very cool financial apps came into the picture. And so with just one click with your phone, you could do the whole thing. It was called US dollar electronic market. So you clicked on buy dollars, and the app did all the three steps, and you finally got your dollars. So we can have other examples, but I think that this is one pretty example of the kind of tensions you were mentioning.
One last question from the room. Here. Oh.
First of all, for the US dollar to be like widely used, not only do the public, the consumers, the households need to have, be familiar with it, but also the like the firms, retailers, sellers need to also, be willing to accept it. So do you document the trend where, from the seller side or from the firm's side, they are more and more willing to accept it? And if so, why? And if I'm allowed to ask another question, so, you've documented this fact that the US dollar has become like de facto more and more popular, but how does that help us understand the official dollarization that Malay raised? Yeah, so that's my two main points. I have other questions, but that's them later.
Because I got one question. It's not easy question for us during 2 minutes, but stabilization of the dollar allow us to understand why the stabilization of economy made by the campaign was accepted for at least for the 30% of the population in Argentina. 99% of the economists and then at that moment said technical impossible measure. The economy of Argentina was capable of dollarize. At least there wasn't enough dollars in the economy to dollarize. But important for us in this story is to show that for at least the 3% of the population, and then people accepted this proposal of dollarize. Why? Because the proposal of dollarize was in service. First, it was a tool very clear to combat inflation, to curb inflation. First. And second, it's a moral dimension in this economic proposition proposal that the dollarize allow to cut the politician, the main enemy, Milei's discourse. It's not the immigrant, the politician, the enemy. Or with the dollarization of the economy, they cut the possibility of the politician to use to imprint money, to use and to steal the money. It's on that there is connection between the popularization of the dollar and the rise of and this tension between the economic position very difficult to develop, but the point of view, yeah, moral acceptable for part of the society.
Quickly on the first. One thing that I think maybe it's not so clear, we didn't make it so clear, is that when we say that the US dollar is pretty much used in Argentina, at the level of transaction is not that much used. So of course, there are very important markets as the real estate markets, which is completely dollarized in the 80s. So their pricing and transactions are done in US dollars. Namely, they are done in cash, like a full apartment sold in cash these days. So, but that in the other markets, which are dollarized, except for very specific moments of very acute crisis in '89 with the hyperinflation and in 2001, where maybe other kind of transactions were also made in dollars. What happens is that many prices are set in US dollars, many accounting is done in dollars. It is possible that retailers and small businesses would make their evaluations, their beta assessment in US dollars, those accounting would be done in US dollars, regular transactions would be done in the national currency. So retailers may, for instance, save in dollars during the year and then resell those dollars at the end of the year to pay bonuses to employees, for instance. So it is not that they accept dollars as payment from their clients or from their governments. That is something that could change in the near future. The government has just announced that in April, US dollars could be used to pay for regular purchases using US dollars in bank accounts. I don't know how that would turn, difficult to say, but well, it's to be continued. Thank you very much for your question.
And thank you both again. We're beyond time, but no one's coming to kick us out just yet, Jenny, so I think we're okay. Please join me in thanking Mariana and Ariel once again. Thank you so much. Jenny posted in the chat for those who are online the link to the Spanish version of the book. But if people here are interested in that, you can come up and talk to us. You guys can hang out for a little bit. Yeah. And thank you all for coming. Thank those of you who are here on Zoom. Thank you, Magda. Thank you, Taylor. Very nice to see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Lovely to see you. Bye-bye.